Doesn't he have it? That's the question that millions of Americans are asking about Michael Jackson, the king of pop. It is called vitiligo. It's a skin disease that affects only about 1 or 2% of the entire population, black and white. And according to Mr. Jackson, that's the reason he now appears so pale. You'll be meeting some people later in the program who actually suffer from this debilitating and demoralizing disease, and you'll see how they work hard to conceal or at least to deal with it. But first, on our studio stage, I'd like you to meet Randy Taraborelli. Randy has followed Michael Jackson most of his life. He's written this controversial book on your monitor there, the book Michael Jackson, The Magic and the Madness. Joining Randy is an old pal, Mike Walker. He is the editor of the National Enquirer, which I gather is no longer Michael Jackson's favorite publication. And Richard Johnson, a columnist for the New York Daily News. We're going to talk to these guys first about some of the many issues, controversial and otherwise, that were raised with Michael Jackson's historic interview with Oprah Winfrey, his first interview in 14 years. I guess the central point is the vitiligo, or the lack of it. Is he dyeing his skin, etc., and that whole thing. But we didn't come here to pick on Michael today. I actually felt sort of sorry for him. Randy, was that the intent of his appearance, do you think? I don't know if that was the intent, but it certainly was the effect that it had on a lot of people. A lot of people feel much more sympathetic to Michael Jackson now that he has done that interview, and sort of bared his soul in many ways to Oprah in front of a national audience. I've interviewed Michael myself, and I know that it's difficult to get Michael to talk at all, let alone to talk for 90 minutes. So in many ways, I thought it was pretty effective.
I think in terms of intent, you have to look at what's happened to his record sales.
What, Richard? Since
the interview, it's the album, which was lingering down, you know, in the middle of the charts, has shot up to like number 12. And I think that if half the people who saw the show, who said that they were more inclined to buy the record, actually go out and buy it, it's going to be like number 1 soon.
Well, lest we feel too sorry for Michael. I mean, when I watched that interview, first of all, my wife almost threw me out of the room. She said, if you don't shut up, you're getting out of here. My wife loves Michael Jackson.
First thing at the screen?
Well, I kept hearing him saying, oh, what, those, there's no hyperbaric chamber, Oprah. You know, I was going crazy, knowing what I know. But when I went into the newsroom the next day, everybody was saying, oh, we got to do this. And I said, look at us. We're going to do exactly what he wants us to do. We're now going to do a great big issue about Michael Jackson. That's the genius of this man. I mean, look what's happened to his record sales since that interview and since all the press on him.
But on the other hand, is it possible, Michael, that you have given this man an unfair shake, that you've picked on Michael? You and me and the media.
I think when it comes to celebrities, I think we probably do pick on celebrities at one point or another. But, I mean, the big whopper, I mean, when Michael's nose would have started to grow where he'd need more surgery. I mean, he was sounding like Pinocchio when he started talking about how there was no hyperbaric chamber.
That's the chamber he allegedly slept in.
Yeah, the thing that he slept in. We've all seen the pictures. They went all over the world. Michael actually used it in a music video called Leave Me Alone, about the tabloids. Well, let me tell you about Leave Me Alone. You know, we can take a joke, but Michael Jackson is the one who gave us the pictures of him in the hyperbaric chamber through his manager, Frank DeLeo, his manager at the time, and through his plastic surgeon, Dr. Steve Heflin, to the point that when we said, gee, they were Polaroids, and we said these aren't good enough to reproduce in the National Enquirer, they went back and reshot the photos. Michael not only did that, but he insisted that when we did the story, that we use the word bizarre in referring to him in the story.
What about the Elephant Man bones? Didn't you break that, Richard?
I broke that story, and it was amazing to me watching the show where he's claiming that this was a completely fabricated rumor. It might be fabricated, but he's the guy who fabricated it, because that came directly from his publicist.
Yeah, in 1986, you have to understand, to put it into a time frame. In 1986, when these stories broke, Michael Jackson was very rarely written about in the tabloids, and it was an experiment. He gave his manager and his lawyer and plastic surgeon a copy of H.B. Barnum's biography and said, I want my life to be the greatest show on earth. And that's what they were doing at that time. They were fabricating these stories back then to give Michael the image that he wanted. He was trying to promote his Captain EO film that was breaking at that point for Disney, and he wanted a science fiction-like image, and that's what they were doing. But what happened after that was that people in his company began feeding stories to publications that weren't true, that Michael did not approve, and that's when there became a problem.
Michael Jackson could have, at any point, picked up a telephone and called us and said, I don't approve of these stories, stop them.
Yeah, that's true,
We
too.
thought they were coming from Michael. When somebody is empowered to speak for Michael...
And that's the thing. I think that people don't understand how these stories evolve. The tabloid reporters and newspaper writers, we don't sit in a room and fabricate stories about Michael Jackson. These stories have sources, and if the sources are Michael Jackson's managers or Michael Jackson's family members, then you're inclined to believe these people, especially if somebody like LaToya Jackson comes to you with a story. Now her credibility is a little shaky, but back then, 5 years ago, you would believe LaToya Jackson.
Actually, I want to bring, we have a little clip of LaToya. I don't want to show LaToya speaking yet about the alleged vitiligo, the skin disease, but this is the current issue, Mike?
Yes.
This is, well, I guess it's last week, but all right. Now, what Michael Jackson never told Oprah. Okay, this is kind of be like a kind of a lie detector test for the Michael Jackson epic interview. He had plastic surgery only 2 times on his nose. Mike Walker, is that true?
No. According to the head of plastic surgery at UCLA, Dr. Robert Kotler, I believe his name is, he counts at least 8. One source of mine said he heard from Steve Heflin that it was 15. It is obvious to anyone who was watching that show, even to my wife, that Michael saying he'd only had 2 little procedures was ridiculous. He's had many, many, many plastic surgery operations. By the way, the doctor at UCLA said the 8 that I'm counting do not count touch-ups.
So there's stories now that his nose is so deteriorated, he's had so much surgery on it that he's had to have it rebuilt up because it was actually like falling apart and collapsing. And I believe that from looking at it. It doesn't look like it's holding up well.
Is Brooke Shields the love of his life, Randy?
Well, Michael, I believe, said on Oprah that the 2 of them were dating, and I think that by Michael's definition, dating is probably what they're doing, but Brooke Shields has since that time made it very clear to the media that their relationship is platonic.
Didn't you find it interesting, by the way, there's supposedly no preconditions, this was live television, and boom, there was the picture of Brooke Shields there, conveniently ready.
Well, I'll tell you this one thing.
Michael, are you suggesting?
Would I suggest that anyone on TV would set something up?
Never.
Heavens to Betsy, no.
Richard? I could say one thing. If he and Brooke Shields ever were lovers, that Michael Jackson certainly was not the first. Because I know the guy who actually
Brooke's no longer a virgin?
No.
That was Arsenio's first question on his first show.
So do I.
Brooke, what about this virgin thing? How's
I
that
wonder if
going?
it's the same guy.
Yacht? Okay, well, anyway.
Yacht, you said? What
Just
about Tatum O'Neal?
Tatum O'Neal, when she was about 13 years old and very streetwise, I mean, she was a star already. She met Michael when he was about 19, and Michael couldn't even handle the sexuality of a little babe like this. I mean, she scared him to death. At one point, she actually tried to seduce Michael. She was parading around in bra and panties and so forth, and it was all kid stuff. She never did. I'll tell you an interesting thing, and I'd like to know what Randy thinks about this, or Richard. To the best of my knowledge, and I have asked, believe me, many times over the years, the question of what does Michael Jackson do and with whom does he do it? I have never found anyone who could say, even though, for instance, on his Japan tour, he had lots of little girls in his room, but I have never met anyone who has been able to say that, yes, Michael Jackson is anything other than a virgin, as his sister claims he is. And I wonder, if he weren't, wouldn't somebody have come forward by now?
You know, I interviewed 400 people for my book. And I have never found anybody who was, and these were people very close to Michael, and I've never found anybody who had ever heard of Michael having an intimate relationship with anybody else, let alone found somebody who actually had a relationship like that with Michael Jackson. So, at that point, yeah,
well,
I agree.
you would think that between the 2 of you, you would have heard.
Somebody, yeah. Yeah.
I'll tell you.
And not only that, but you have to know also the pressure, and that the first woman who actually has sex with Michael Jackson, this is a man who will find her right here.
Well, now, wait a minute. I'm not, no, it's just a curiosity.
All right, so he's a virgin. All right, let the guy be a 31-year-old virgin.
I mean, basically, he prefers the company of people like Macaulay Culkin or Emmanuel, what was that, Lewis?
Lewis. You know, almost every day. Remember we saw those kind of eerie pictures of that carnival out there in the distance when he and Oprah were walking? It looked like a horror show because there was nobody there. But actually, during the day, almost every day, Michael has children, either from the Make-A-Wish Foundation, from local schools, almost every single day.
Well, that's wonderful.
At that ranch.
And you do point out in this edition that he has given $50 million
to
charity.
The things he
now,
does...
that's putting his money where his mouth is. So
the things he does for children are wonderful.
Very, very generous man.